Have you wanted to use your home equity to pay off debt or improve your house, but found the old way too painful? There's now a new, better option for accessing your home equity. It's called HomePace. Here's the key. It's not a loan, so there's no monthly payments or interest. Instead, HomePace gives you money up front as an investment in your home. That's right, you get money that you can use however you want without the burden of monthly payments. Then someday when you decide to sell, you share a portion of the gains or losses in your home's value with HomePace. That means if your home's value drops, HomePace takes a loss too. HomePace gives homeowners a better choice to access home equity. No monthly payments, no interest. To get an instant quote, go to homepace.com/quote. It takes less than 5 minutes. That's homepace/quote to get started.
Hi guys, Sam here, host of the AEW Match Guide podcast. Before we get started on today's episode, I wanted to quickly let you all know that after Double or Nothing 2022, the creation of the second edition of the Definitive AEW Match Guide will begin. The first edition sought votes from a diverse group of AEW commentators around the internet wrestling community to collectively rank the greatest matches from the first 2 years of the promotion's history, and that list is what the matches this podcast reviews is based on. For the second edition of the list that will look at matches between Double or Nothing 2021 and 2022, I'm hoping to cast that net even wider, so I'm hoping to get your support. If you're interested in submitting your votes and weren't involved last year, then please reach out to me on Twitter at Sir_Samuel or via email sambrownmedia@gmail.com. And when the time comes, I'll send you out a ballot to get your vote. To celebrate this, for the month of May, we'll be looking at 3 different matches from previous Double or Nothings, and then in the week before Double or Nothing 2022, I'll be hosting a YouTube live stream previewing the pay-per-view. Looking forward to see you all there. That's it for now though, so let's hit the music and get this show on the road. Welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast, where we deep dive into the best matches in AEW history. Brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network and your host, Sam Brown. Yes, hello and welcome to the AEW Match Guide podcast. I'm your host, Sam Brown. Thank you for joining me. Every week, alongside a special guest, I take an in-depth look at one of the best matches in AEW history, taken from the Definitive AEW Match Guide, as ranked by over 30 wrestling commentators from around the internet wrestling community. If you enjoy the show today, you can subscribe and rate it on your podcast app of choice, and make sure you check out all of the other great shows on the Social Suplex Podcast Network that cover all aspects of the world of pro wrestling. My guest for today is a writer for Wrestle Inn, Libby Cadman, and we're looking at the Elite vs. the Inner Circle Stadium Stampede Match from Double or Nothing 2020. How are you going today, Libby?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you? Very excited to talk about this match.
This is a match that I had penciled in from the start that this is going to be one that I'm looking forward to breaking down. It was an incredible moment in time. It was an incredible achievement given everything they were going through at the time. So, and it's something that holds up to this day. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it.
Oh, absolutely. Watching it back 2 years later, especially where we are now with AEW, was very bittersweet, a little bit emotional, and just amazing.
Well, we won't beat around the bush too much, but as I ask all of my guests here on the AEW Match Guide podcast, Libby, how did you get into AEW?
I think, like a lot of people, I followed the Elite from New Japan over into their new adventure. It felt like totally the right thing for them, and it was very exciting, and it was sort of a no-brainer that, I was going to be watching AEW from now on.
It was interesting how New Japan sort of they kind of wanted to do the American stuff, and obviously Ring of Honor were a presence here in America, but I guess their ambition didn't match what the Elite wanted to do. And we sort of really see that in full fulfillment today, with a weekly TV show always packing out 4,000, 5,000 people every week, which was just something that neither of those companies were even trying to do, and were scaling to do at all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You know what? Funnily enough, I was reading the Young Bucks book last night, and, they spoke about what it was like, that split. And it's quite emotional in a way. And, it really felt like the Elite and what they wanted to do and New Japan weren't on the same page. And it was time for something new and different. And I think it's only been for the better. I think everyone has had to up their game since AEW started, and it just made total sense that this was a thing for them.
It's interesting you mentioned that. That's not something. It's very common that people have got into AEW that way. That's exactly the same thing for me, but it's not something we've talked about how with any of the other guests, how that would have actually been very difficult for them, given that, talk about a mutually beneficial relationship. Like, New Japan really gave particularly Kenny Omega a platform that Kenny Omega took full advantage of and brought lots of fans in. So, and he was someone who was very invested in himself as a wrestler in Japan. So moving that away. And then, of course, the Young Bucks, they had tried going through TNA. They had flirted with WWE and been somewhere rejected by that. And so they had to build themselves up, and Ring of Honor were a big part of giving them a platform to be themselves and to grow themselves and to put themselves out there. And so both of these companies that they're leaving are companies that have had a leap of faith with them and obviously benefited from that relationship. But at the same time, they would have felt a sense of loyalty to that.
Oh, 100%. And the original biggest independent show ever, New Japan and Ring of Honor were part of that.
Huge parts of it, yeah.
And it couldn't have happened without them. But the Young Bucks speak about in their book how they really felt like New Japan wasn't taking them as seriously as the rest of the world. They weren't able to maybe express themselves in the way they wanted. There was kind of this split with kind of Bullet Club USA, Bullet Club Japan. And along with Kenny, it was just like, things have got to change. And they were really considering WWE for a really long time. And I'm very glad they didn't go to WWE in the end. But it's so interesting because, New Japan definitely felt jilted by it. And Ring of Honor, they kind of understood, but again, it was a bit crushing for them. But there is this sense of this was always going to happen in a way that, the elite, they've never functioned on a level where they follow the path of everyone else. I mean, the Stadium Stampede, I think, is an example of that. It's such a unique piece of wrestling. Something like this was always going to happen in some form. It just took a Tony Khan, a lover of wrestling with a lot of money, to sort of link up with them. And now here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And neither of us would call AEW a perfect company by any means, but it's certainly a company that, for myself, obviously I launched a whole podcast about the company. So, this is a company that I've really immensely enjoyed and really made me love wrestling in a way that I didn't beforehand. So, yeah, I'm very thankful that all happened. So, enough beating around the bush. We're going to get into the match, the Stadium Stampede match from Double or Nothing 2020. As we do every single week on the AEW Match Guide, I'm going to give the match its flowers. Unfortunately, Dave Meltzer did not rate though, because it was a cinematic match. He doesn't rate those, and fair enough. It's a bit of a different thing that they're doing. But Cage Match currently rates it at 9.26. When we did the AEW Match Guide back in 2021, looking at the best matches across the first 2 years of AEW, this match came in fourth. So a match that is absolutely beloved by AEW fans. So definitely a lot to dig into. We'll start with looking at the build. Of course, it's the Inner Circle versus the Elite. And this was a rivalry that was born on the very first Dynamite, very early on. You could even argue it was born in the second press conference when Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho got stuck into it at the second press conference. But of course, the Inner Circle came about on the very first episode of Dynamite, beating up the Elite and becoming, I guess, the major team to rival the Elite in their promotion. And they were particularly strong and particularly influential in the feud that Cody Rhodes had with Chris Jericho. Of course, there was some large multi-man things and lots of big brawls at the end of the Dynamite programs. And then they were used for stepping. The Inner Circle were used as stepping stones for Jon Moxley to use to get to Chris Jericho in his program leading up to Revolution in 2020. Libby, what were your first impressions of the Inner Circle and the initial impact they had in AEW?
Well, I was interested for sure. I think factions are very important. Alliances, friendships, all those things, all those relationships are what really drive anything towards actual matches. So having the Inner Circle, I think, was great. I really enjoyed, the fact that this gave a platform for Santana Ortiz, as well as Sammy Guevara. And I think it just made sense, really, for them. And I definitely felt like Jericho, he wanted to come in as a heel. And the Elite, they really, like, no matter what they were going to do, they were going to be faces. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. The first year they were not going to get booed. There was no chance.
Not a chance. And I think that was actually incredibly hard for them. I think they felt a lot of weight in that, and that they couldn't necessarily be the wrestlers they were before. So that transition, I think, was interesting for them, as well as they definitely felt a sense of the Elite felt like they shouldn't have got all the wins and the pins. And so it was an interesting time to see us watching, like, the Inner Circle and the Elite, and everyone's behind the Elite, but the Inner Circle are the ones that are really, like, climbing the rankings, making the impact compared to them. So it felt right. It felt natural. It felt like the Elite needed that counter faction, that counter people. Everyone had their relationships there as well, like LAX and the Young Bucks. They'd had plenty of matches. Sammy Guevara also was very connected to the Elite. Jericho and Kenny have history. And as well as Page and Jericho, started off AEW with a rivalry. So it made total sense, really. And it also sort of opened the avenues, I think, for a lot of fun, creative minds to do something. So I was excited, I think, when they first came around.
Yeah, it was interesting how Chris Jericho, his early thing was almost a very meta thing, storyline that he was going for, that talking about how AEW was all about him and how he was the one to thank for AEW, and how the fans should be thanking him because he's Chris Jericho and he's the one that's brought all of these fans together. He's the one that's brought Tony Khan on board. He's the one that's done all these things. And of course the fans are there. A large majority of them, especially early on, are there because of the Elite. They're there because of what those guys have done on BTE and all of that. So the Inner Circle was a really good counterbalance to that. And Chris Jericho's early character and what he was talking about was an interesting counterbalance to, like, the audience narrative and what the audience knew to be true, but with enough truth in it, because of course Chris Jericho is by far, he was the biggest name to be on board early on, and no doubt brought a lot of attention to AEW, particularly in those early Dynamites when he was just creating meme after meme week after week. And doing some of the best work of his career, establishing himself as the champion, as the top dog, and Cody Rhodes was just on fire opposite him as the beating heart of the Elite and of the promotion. And that's kind of what this rivalry is born out of, because we'll get to the video package, but one of the questions that the video package asks before the match, Kenny Omega says, maybe we weren't the ones that were destined to change the world. Maybe it was you guys all along. And, that's a theme that was there right in the very first press conference when Chris Jericho's there saying, we're going to change the universe. I'm going to change the universe. And he's, signaling that to himself is like an early tip of the cap.
100%. And I think there is the Inner Circle were also important in the fact with Chris Jericho heading it. If you were catching AEW for the first time and you didn't know about the Elite, you probably knew who Chris Jericho was. And so they're a perfect sort of, connecting way for audience who don't know who the Elite are, to learn who they are and what they're about, and also be open to them. I think if you hadn't watched them in New Japan, you might really wonder why they're so favored by this audience. And by having Chris Jericho and what he brings to the product, I think also opened people's minds or brought eyes to the Elite who you might not have known. AEW is for people who love the Elite, but it's also for as many people to watch as possible. Absolutely.
And definitely early on there were people who weren't as familiar with the Elite as, say, you or I were, who loved their content, consumed BTE every week like it was some sort of religious program, and dug deep into Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi's years long relationship. Truly. That's another podcast. We can't get
that is a whole nother conversation.
Look, the Stadium Stampede match, like, this is a long and winding road to get there. We've sort of laid the groundwork, but the actual match, of course, originally these guys post-Revolution, after Inner Circle had their match with, well, Chris Jericho had the match with Jon Moxley that involved all of the Inner Circle. And there was, of course, the tag match between the Young Bucks and Hangman and Kenny. These two factions sort of renewed hostilities post-Revolution 2020 and were building up originally to a blood and guts match that was going to take place when AEW debuted in the New York markets. That, of course, never happened due to the global pandemic shutting everything down. And then the delays in the pandemic meant changes to what was happening. Of course, we never got a blood and guts match between those guys. And Cody dipped out of this program to sort of pursue his own thing and set up the TNT belt. And then he was replaced by Matt Hardy, who debuted on the first, I guess we'd call it pandemic or lockdown episode of Dynamite. In the main event, he debuted with Matt Jackson saying he pulled in a favor. And, of course, we had Vanguard 1 coming in, Matt Hardy appearing and then teleporting that segment. What did you think of Matt Hardy getting involved and Cody not being part of this?
You know, I in my mind, this for me is the unofficial departing of Cody from the Elite. It really felt like this was the moment where the split happened. I don't know if on purpose or what, you know, the TNT title came about, but it's kind of this weird kind of liminal time where Cody's not quite there, and then by the Stadium Stampede he's out, and it's very interesting to look on the build up and see that promo that Cody cut right at the beginning of the pandemic where they're prepping for blood and guts and he asks the Elite to sort of stand by him, and he goes through them one by one, and it makes you believe Cody is more invested in the Elite more than anyone at that time. And so it's very fascinating to watch that back compared to where they actually got to by the time it was Stadium Stampede, because the narrative was that they were down on numbers, right? The Elite didn't have enough people for this match, and that the whole point of Blood and Guts as well was, I believe they were fighting to have a numbers advantage as well. So there's this whole thing, and because
Nick Jackson was, I'll just interrupt you there. One of the numbers things that you mentioned was Nick Jackson was injured. He got taken out by Revolution. I think that was so he could. I think his wife was having a kid or something along those lines. He was actually meant to be on leave at that point. And so they were down on numbers that way. But continue.
Yes, yeah. And so when it came about that this whole angle, they didn't have enough people, and then it was Broken Matt that was joining them. Honestly, I was very overjoyed. Like it felt like a great little bonus to this. It was great for the company. It felt right for the Elite. You know, they have a lot of history, especially the Young Bucks with Matt Hardy. And you know, it was a really joyous moment when he showed up. And it kind of, you know, I think that was the moment it was cemented. It was like, nope, Cody is not going to be involved in this match whatsoever. He's not even gonna, you know, rally behind them. And it felt like it felt good. I mean, I was sad Cody wasn't part of it, and there was this weird question about if he was even connected with them anymore. But I feel like bringing Broken Matt in was like a little bit of like an insertion of energy into what was happening. And you know, when Matt popped up, it was a little bit hokey pokey with the with the cutting around the stadium, but I loved it. I thought it was a great addition. It felt right, and it felt like it sparked back up this rivalry, because we were in that kind of question mark space. What was happening with the Elite? Very much, you know, the meme with the lady in the maths going on all around her trying to connect the dots. So it felt like it sort of anchored it back to, you know, team versus team. And you could see the look on Chris Jericho's face when Matt Hardy was debuted and brought up and joining the team. He, like, his face dropped, and you know, it was a nice injection of energy into going into Stadium Stampede. And the concept that Matt was going to be part of Stadium Stampede, you knew there was going to be some crazy stuff happening.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Cody promo at the start and how it's kind of getting back to team versus team. But even within that, you still had tension within the Elite. You had like a lot of unresolved things from that rivalry that Kenny and the Bucks and Hangman all had. And even in that promo, I think Hangman doesn't actually get into the ring. Because a few weeks ago, when Cody left, I went back to try and find when the last time all of the Elite together were in the ring. And we're on camera together, and that was the first place I went. But Nick, of course, wasn't there at that point because he was away. But I noted when that happened, knowing I had this podcast coming up at some point, that Hangman didn't enter the ring while Kenny and Matt did. So even then, you've still got this space between them, which is going to go into this match as well, and that's continuing to be emphasized throughout the build-up. With the Matt Hardy stuff, look, I'll be honest, I had a little less patience for it than you did.
Yeah.
I didn't like the sort of breaking of the realistic universe, and I still don't like that sort of stuff in AEW. I don't think that has no place in wrestling, but I don't know. For me, I like to have sort of some sort of level of consistency at least, and that just pushed things out too far for me. But you know what? Even though I had less patience for it at the start, as we're going to talk about when we get into the match, I think it actually worked for this match and in this circumstance because of everything that's going on and because of the type and the tone of this match. I think it works. So even though, like, initially, little stickler over here didn't have a lot of time for it.
It makes total sense. It's something that if you're going to do it, it has to be done well. And the Stadium Stampede does it well. And I think that's what kind of changes perhaps your opinion, or it charms you more. Because like I said, you know, when they did that cutting of Matt around the stadium, like he was like apparating around, it was quite hokey pokey. And that I think is a natural response to be like, I mean, I wasn't convinced, but I was excited about the prospect of it. And
I mean, even more than just the teleporting, like this guy is saying that he is a spirit that is thousands of years old, that is inhabiting the body of this person, and has like cosmic superpowers. I don't know. It just was too much for me to deal with in what is for all means for all intents and purposes a reality-based wrestling program.
Sure.
But you know what? This is not the time to like debate that and have that full discourse about that. Because as we said, like it actually works in this match. So, and we'll get into that when we talk about the match itself. Now, I sort of brought it up. We touched on a little bit, but I wanted to get into it. What did you think of the tension amongst the Elite getting into it?
I loved it. I loved the tension. Oh my gosh. I love the drama. It's amazing. The whole thing with, Kenny and Hangman being a tag team, I absolutely adored it, and I loved that they really cashed in on the fact of how that made everybody else feel through that journey. And I was trying to trace all of this back, and really the Elite were never the same officially. I think after the Young Bucks versus Kenny and Adam, I think that was the final straw for them. Them winning the titles was that first sort of taste of tension. And Kenny and Hangman's relationship, that was so interesting to watch. Sort of Kenny always reaching for Hangman and wanting that that connection, and Hangman never quite giving it up, but so desperate for that validation and that belt at the same time, for them to then face the Young Bucks and be so self-aware in that match. I mean, you have to talk about that match for ages as well. But they were never the same after that. Particularly
it's like there was
Matt and Hangman.
It's like there was things that were said in that build-up that couldn't be unsaid. And like at that point, I honestly think like there's going to be a day, and I thought Cody Rhodes would be part of this, but I thought there would be a day in 5 years time where they do a big story arc to a reunion of the Elite, and I thought Cody Rhodes would also be part of that, even though it was clear, that something was not quite there behind the scenes for, his final. Well, even from this point onwards, he wasn't part of the Elite anymore. But this is straight after that tag match. And, Kenny can forgive the Bucks for what they've done to him because of they've got such a deep a much more equal relationship, I guess. Whereas Hangman, the rawness of some of the things that were said just couldn't be undone for him. And the feeling was mutual with the Bucks. I loved how the build up played into that. But showed that they would actually have to be able to fight on the same page if they were going to beat the Inner Circle, because in the Inner Circle you had a team that was firing on all cylinders and all going the same way, all pulling the same direction.
Absolutely.
I think in the video package, as Chris Jericho said, he's we never hit our finishes on each other. That's changed, but we never hit our finishes on each other. We are united. You guys aren't. And I love that they had that thread of tension heading into this, even though obviously the ultimate threat is the Inner Circle. The thing I love about the Elite is it's always complex characters and they always have a continual line of canon. It's not we finished with that program. We're now just going to change and move on to the next one. And this is the only thing we ever remember. There's a consistent line of canon throughout the years between how the characters interact and what they're remembering and the things they bring up. And me and Caro talked about that when we talked about the Hangman and Kenny feud and how this was almost a moment of where these two characters sort of get back together a little bit, but at the same time, there's still that tension going throughout the whole team.
Definitely. And as well, with COVID, the Bucks and Adam, they weren't there for quite a long time.
Yep.
And they only came back, I think, the Dynamite before to save a hilariously torn up. Kenny's he's got jorts on and a t-shirt that's supposed to look like it's been torn up, but it's obviously just been sliced in several precise locations. He looks ridiculous. And so the Bucks and Hangman, they come in to save him. And immediately after they save Kenny, Hangman walks away. He walks, they're in the field and he walks down the tunnel and away from them. So there was very much this sense as well as they're back, but we're acknowledging that there's been a pandemic. We're acknowledging there's been some space, and we're acknowledging that actually they mention it in the opening BT as well, which I thought was very well done. And I wish they did more of these. I think these are so good. That the Elite's real enemy is themselves. They're, we feel like the Elite is probably going to win this, and the only way they might maybe lose is by their own self-sabotage, by their own personal problems between each other. So the stakes are very, very high for the Elite between themselves, let alone just winning this match.
Now, because of the way that the build-up happened with, as we said, the Bucks were stuck in the West Coast. They weren't able to make the Georgia tapings and weren't able to travel to Dynamite for quite a while. You had, of course, Chris Jericho there with Kenny Omega and Matt Hardy. And then you had Hangman Page sort of separated off as well. There's a lot of random stuff happening. Nick and Matt have a feud at this point during this time. And they have a huge match on the 200th episode of BTE, which is a cinematic match. We, of course, had the legendary Chris Jericho versus Pineapple Pete rivalry, which was probably the highlight for the Georgia tapings.
Yeah, and actually kind of important for this. It fed into this, weirdly enough.
Oh, explain how. Going to how.
Well, it just kind of it led up to that point of really cementing Chris Jericho as something about it felt like he was gonna unhinge himself for the stadium stampede. Even though he's no longer champion, he's still quite unhinged and very as aggressive as ever. And then of course we had a really good street fight between
Kenny Omega and Matt Hardy versus Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara. Was there anything about all of those things that I mentioned that you wanted to bring up or you thought struck a chord with you? Yeah, what did you think of it all?
Yeah, again, it was kind of like this weird liminal time where we were kind of, we weren't sure who was going to be around, what was happening. And I thought the street fight actually was really good to bring us back to sort of a narrative thread of the Inner Circle versus the Elite. Like, it felt like it needed that in there to remind us that that's where these tensions lie. And especially that match, you know, it ends with Kenny basically versus the Inner Circle. And that was very important because the main beef really kind of going through that, other than everything going on, was the fact that they had put Nick out of action, right? And they were kind of holding on to that. And then this felt like it was needed to really sort of amp up the volume as to why they would even have the Stadium Stampede match, and to set it up like it was Kenny by himself with the whole Inner Circle sort of taking him out, really gave the reason why everyone from the Elite needed to come back in and they needed to face each other as teams, rather than, you know, again, like a Matt and Kenny versus whoever again. And also the street fight, I think, set up a bit of lore and a bit of fun that we revisit in the Stadium Stampede. And it also felt like, you know, to see Kenny doing that stuff, it had that whiff of DDT to it. Watching him climb that crane and jump off, I was like, that's very Kota Ibushi of you. It sort of put us in this kind of space as well to be like, oh, like this is what they can do in a street match. Imagine what could be done kind of like for this.
Yeah, like, because we think of Kenny Omega as, like, you know, best bout machine, main event versus Kota Ibushi, Tanahashi, IWGP champion. But, you know, this is a bloke who got his start wrestling in campgrounds, diving off piers and doing all sorts of wild stuff. I just remember with that beforehand, I can't remember if it was on BTE or if it was on Dynamite, but him, like, being like, I can get in a fight. I'm a tough guy.
Yes.
I can get in a fight. Do I wear jeans? We should wear jeans for this because we're in a street fight.
Yeah, there was this whole thing about it was Kenny's first real street fight.
Yeah.
Despite the fact, you know, him going over to Japan was on the basis that he was the king of the Canadian streets and everything like that. It was this concept that, like, if you know Kenny from DDT, you've seen him do some pretty wild stuff. This concept, the American audience were learning this kind of ridiculous side of Kenny, and the concept that he'd never done this like on American soil, I thought was great as well.
And I wanted to mention the Nick versus Matt Jackson match because, like, thinking about it, between that and the street fight, like, we should have known that these guys were going to be able to do that. These guys knew what they were doing going into a match like this. Like, that Nick and Matt Jackson thing kind of came from Nick being taken out. He wanted a match against Matt to prove that he was ready for this. He was ready to get going, and Matt didn't want to have the match. So I can't remember why Matt decided someone would get a match against him, but they had like a battle royale with like Brandon Cutler and Scorpio Sky and some other random people from the West Coast.
There were the
on
SoCal
BTE.
people.
And they had on the tennis courts at the apartment complex or whatever that the Bucks live at. I don't know. and then Nick wins it, and they have this giant cinematic match where they brawl through the condominiums. They have all these like flashbacks, but you get the sort of the reason I said I brought it up and wanted to talk about it is you get the sort of blend of like comedy, Easter eggs, like winks and nudges mixed with like real drama that you can get invested in and that, you know, can make you feel a little bit emotional and make you feel, you know, a little bit sentimental and get you really emotionally engaged in the match. And from that, and as of course you mentioned the absolute hilarity and craziness that was the street fight, they really gave us some flags to say, we know what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And I don't think, like, I personally wasn't worried about it at all. I didn't expect it to be quite the success it was, but we should have said, like, I should have seen.
The signs, they were all there.
Yep. Let's get into the actual match itself. It did start off with a video package. I forgot how good this video package was. I forgot it had even been one. But as you said, like, it was a really good video package. Really summarized those things we were talking about, those themes of like who controls AEW, whose revolution is this? Is this the elites? Is this the inner circles? And as you mentioned, talked about the disunity that was apparent and the tension that was apparent in the elite. Yeah, you said before you want them to do more of these.
You know, one of the things that I love about wrestling is the production side. And so I think when it comes to a match, a really, really good VT can make all the difference. It's what I think sets the tone, I think, before a match. It can make you feel differently before you go in. And AEW has been criticized, and I think rightly so, for putting together feuds or matches or things, and people who don't necessarily know the elite that well or more casual viewers get upset. They feel they don't understand, or that they've not kept up. It doesn't reward them. And I think a really good VT solves that problem because they're concise, they're well edited, they really set a feeling, and they give you all the information you need before going in. Like, it's that little reminder, and it sets you up ready to remember and see anything particular they might want you to see, right? So maybe they're going to reference something in the match, but if you haven't been following, or perhaps you're not, that invested, you're going to miss it, and you're maybe going to question that moment. So I think these VTs, when they use them and they do them well, they make all the difference. And I thought this one was just so good watching it back.
Yeah, this was really well produced, and they splashed out for the voiceover guy as well. I don't know who it is, but it's a guy who I've heard in like big sports documentaries. I'm pretty sure I've heard him in movie trailers. Like, they splashed some cash to get that guy, and it was good. It was really well spent, and a great setup for the match. And of course, the match opens with like a drone or helicopter shot going over the stadium, and giving a sense of the scale of everything. The field's like done up. There's cheerleaders, there's pyro going off, all sorts of paraphernalia around. It's set up to have like a big dramatic scale, and we see that right from the start. And then of course we have the entrances. The Inner Circle come out with matching black and red football jerseys. The Elite come out with their BTE music. And, of course, there's no Hangman Page in the initial entrances. What did you think of the setting, the presentation, and all of that before the match began?
Loved seeing the stadium. Reminded you of its scale, of the grandiosity. It really set up this concept of this cinematic feeling. And I love that they cashed in on the football feeling of the entrances, right? They had them running out onto the field. They had the smoke and the fire. And what I thought was really interesting, and I think really leans into these concepts of unity, was the Inner Circle. They all had matching football gear on, right? And they come out and you see them together as one, and then the Elite come out. So Matt and Nick come out. They also have captains. They have team captains, which is really so irrelevant in this case. So Jericho's the Inner Circle team captain, and Matt and Nick are the captains of the Elite. And Matt and Nick come out, and then they're in their Young Bucks gear. And then Kenny comes out, and you go, okay, so they're not in like a matching costume. And costumes for the Elite have always been more of a heel thing when they all come out, but they do it. They cash in on that stuff. And, they've all said before they feel like, tag teams should have matching gear. They teams should look like a unit. It's really important to them. So for Kenny to come out in similar colors, but them not to have this whole like football team feel as well, was kind of like, interesting when you look at the teams, what looks like a team, what looks like a football team compared to them. It was very different. It sort of felt like a deliberate omission in that moment. And also then, like you said, Kenny came out by himself. There was no Hangman. Matt came out. And what was also very interesting was that they were asking Kenny, where's Adam? Where is he? And Kenny's just very confidently nods and is like, no, he's coming. And we know that later down the line, we get the Elite Squad. So this concept of not only do they're not in football gear, they're not in a team gear, as well as Hangman's not there. It feels like a very sort of tensionous start for them. One team facing the other. One looks like a team, one doesn't.
Yeah, that sums it up perfectly. You've said everything that I would say in that point. All I'd add is that I just love how Ortiz wears a football helmet.
Oh my god!
Kind of like, for those kind of like not quite fitting his head because he's got such big hair and it's fluffed up. It's kind of like sitting clamped down there. Very funny visual that I'm definitely not doing justice to.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. And also it's interesting as well. They're kind of like prepared for a football match, like those pads and that helmet and stuff. That's going to help them. I also really did love the fact that like Mac Jackson came out with a whole bin.
Yeah.
And he had a broom, and I was like, amazing. I love this. This is great. Amazing.
Yeah. Now, getting into the actual match, we're absolutely not going to be able to go into every single detail, but we're going to cover the bigger points. So they start out at like the 40-meter lines, it's probably like the 40-yard lines, I guess, because it's American, and just running at each other full pelt, launching themselves, throwing their weapons and footballs, and it's very chaotic. But they still do like a good job of keeping the focus on the spots that matter. And, it's mostly just brawling and double team moves, but they do a good job of not stepping on one another's toes, getting in each other's way. I think one of the superpowers of the Young Bucks in tag team wrestling is how they structure things so well. And that's evident in this early bit, which could have just been a complete mess, but isn't. However, honestly, I do think this is like the weakest point of the match. It's before they really do anything of consequence. But at the same time, it's like it's necessary to set the table, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Like it's definitely chaotic to start with. And it's also kind of funny that they put a ring in the field. Yeah. It makes sense. It's wrestling, I guess, but falls count anywhere and nobody gets in the ring. And
they do later. They do after.
They do go into the ring after
not
that.
Initially. Yeah.
But they start outside and then the Young Bucks kind of take it to the ring. So it's definitely it makes sense, at the beginning. But I think when it really kind of hits its moment is when we first see Hangman on the horse.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like the first sort of out of the box moment where you get like just the perfect shot of it as well, because it's set up with Sammy Guevara, a shot of him, and he sees Hangman, and of course we've had the beautiful stun shot of him seeing the car that's about to drive at him during the street fight, and he has that same look on his face. And then it cuts to Hangman on a horse charging him down. What an entrance!
It's so good, and it's the moment where we stop watching it like a regular match. The shots aren't the same. It's not the hard cam and the camera's close and whatever. It's for the first time like a framed cinema feeling shot of catching Sammy turn around and his mouth drop, but then to cut against Hangman on a horse. It feels like that's the moment where we move from, okay, this is wrestling, to like, oh, this is something else.
Yeah, but they do it very, very smartly in that they're sort of easing the audience into this like almost alternate reality we're going to be living in for the next half hour or whatever, in that like Hangman's ridden a horse in AEW before. That's how he made an entrance for the biggest match of his career at the time at All Out 2019. And of course we've seen Sammy Guevara have that stunned look and be chased away by something in a very comical manner in the street fight in the lead up. So it's a great way to like just softly ease the audience and change the tone and move us into where we're going to be for the rest of the match. And props to Sammy Guevara, the way he just like just makes a beeline off the road. Hangman chases him down. Yeah.
It's like with the Benny Hill like arms like flapping as he runs. I just thought that was so good. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and then, of course, we go back to the ring with the remaining wrestlers. As I said, like, this is essential for getting us for moving us off. We need to have this bit beforehand. We saw in 2021 what it looks like when they don't have this part, and it was not as good. And I think part of that is straight away you're in like this weird space. Whereas in this, they're having a match. They're hitting wrestling moves. They're all hitting each other's finishes. You know, like Guevara returns and hits two huge shooting star presses, and we get like the typical double team maneuvers and things like that. Yeah, as I said, like it's the weakest part of the match, but it's so essential at the same time.
100%. And I think it's also important to note that Hangman does not join them in the ring. He has his own vendetta as well that's going on. So again, the Elite were also down on numbers in that sense as well. And it definitely brings us back to like the situation where we are. And I think, you know, those big moves sort of taken them, they've gone into the ring, the shooting star presses, you know, Nick, I think he jumps top rope, does a beautiful flip. It brings us back out of the ring as well. Makes sense for us to leave that space to move on to the next thing. So we've established the wrestling, we've done that bit, and now we're moving out again, but we're doing it via wrestling moves. So it keeps the thread going.
I feel like it's worth stressing how important that is, particularly when we're going to compare it to other cinematic matches down the line. So just make sure, people listening, make sure you remember this point. Write that down. But things do sort of, they do start to break up. So you get Omega and Hardy heading off with Santana Ortiz and Hager, and then Jericho and the Bucks sort of brawling off. The next major thing we see is Matt Jackson climbing the uprights and hitting a moonsault off them after brawling with Jericho, hitting a moonsault off onto Jericho, Sammy, and Nick Jackson, his brother. Really high, like surprisingly high up, and a pretty impressive feat of balance from Matt Jackson there.
Yeah, 100%. And what's funny as well is in the VT beforehand, when they're like cutting between all the members of the Elite and what they're saying, Matt says Nick will jump off the freaking field goal post and we won't give an F. And lo and behold, it's Matt Jackson that climbs the field goal and does it. And it's also like he does a little prayer before, which I just thought is just so them. And it's I think it's such a good moment for us to move away from the ring as well. Like we've moved there through wrestling. They've mentioned, you know, on commentary that there are 18 cameras filming this match. And it feels like the first time we're breaking into scenes rather than watching a match. We've got now two halves of the field, and this is, you know, this scene is happening and there's going to be a separate scene somewhere else. And I think it was a really nice way to start that first concept of a scene out of the ring into a different place, and also using the football field, which is exactly what you want to see. Yeah,
absolutely. Fitting with the setting that they're in. We see Hangman on his horse yelling out, still looking for Sammy Guevara. He obviously lost track of Sammy running around. But instead he finds a bar and enters that. We then cut back and we see Omega, Hardy, Santana Ortiz, who've brawled to the upper levels. Jake Hager somehow got lost at that point. I don't know how that happens, but somehow he got... He's pretty thick. I blame Hager on that one, to be honest. And this is where we really get into sort of the Falls Count Anywhere silliness section of things. And we get barricades, garbage cans. Proud and Powerful gets like some salt in the eyes of Omega, slam him into the guardrail, and then before that they powerbomb Omega through that guardrail onto concrete. It gives me like real like Attitude Era Falls Count Anywhere vibes. Those sort of matches that they would have, those just like chaos everywhere. And Omega's like, we'll see later how crazy he is, but like this is early warning. He's willing to do anything.
Oh, 100%. As soon as they went up there, which I really enjoyed how they got up there as well, using the cones. The fact that it just cut to Kenny smacking on Ortiz with a cone just was like made me laugh so much, and it called back to the street fight. There are a lot of cones in the street fight, and I knew as soon as they were up there and as soon as I saw the guardrails, I was like, Kenny's gonna go through one of those It's just so him. It's just, he's going to do it. What's going to happen? I was like, he's going to get a load of offense in, and it's going to look like he's going to put someone through that guardrail, but it's going to be Kenny. I know it's going to be Kenny. And lo and behold, it was Kenny. And it was also like a very like solid heel face moment, you know, like very much like Santana yelling, like, I'm about to take out the trash, to then be thrown into the bins himself.
Yep.
And it just kind of taps into that kind of mad genius that these guys share that moment. And it just feels, it feels like it makes a lot of sense as well, because I think what happens throughout Stadium Stampede is that it becomes, it revisits that idea of it's a numbers game. And throughout, what we start to see is that the Elite's game plan is to sort of take one member out at a time. And it's also important that, you know, to be able to move to another scene, it's got to make sense why we leave that one. And it's also got to make sense why everyone's not involved in that next scene. So putting Kenny through that rail gives a reason for Kenny to be out for a bit, and for us to move to different people.
Yes, and move on we shall, because this is where like the magic kicks in for me. This was the first. We're moving on to Matt Hardy and Santana Ortiz. There's a shallow pool, and Santana Ortiz grab him. They throw him into a pool. Santana dives straight in after him. Ortiz is a bit afraid because apparently he doesn't know how to swim.
Apparently
waist deep water.
Heels in AEW never. MJF can't swim. Ortiz can't swim.
They're like PS2 video game characters.
Truly, maybe they should, you know, go get some swimming lessons together, have a group therapy session. You know, it seems to be a trend.
But then, of course, we get Santana Ortiz holding Matt Hardy down in the water, but he transforms. Somehow the Lake of Reincarnation water is in there, and he transforms into the different versions of himself. We get, you know, the different costumes at this point. We get different graphics on the screen. We even get like the funniest little cut to him from the side. You can see him while he's
under the water.
He's signaling to the camera. Libby, this was like the first real laugh out loud moment for me, especially, you know, when they see him bugging to the camera.
Oh my, it's so good. The concept as well that there's a camera there, just like ready to film that. It's hilarious to me. The fact that the matter of fact graphic pops up and it lists all the different matches, and Santana and Ortiz sell it like it's a physical thing around them, and they're like gesturing as if like that's happening in real life. I loved it. They just really went, you know, there's a line, we're gonna cross it now. You know, like this is the place to do this stuff. It works for Matt. It works for Broken Matt. It's that character is the environment for this bit, and it's also a perfect little bit of like pantomime in there as well. Like it's just this little space that is ridiculous, and it's amazing, and I love it. And I think whether you knew who Matt was, or whether, you know, you weren't particularly bought in on Matt being part of it, but you loved that bit, you know, there's something so silly about it that's really charming, and really like immerses you in that moment.
And one thing I wanted to bring up as well is a production element. The commentators at this point, the commentary track for this is so perfectly, like it's so done so well, balancing levity and the humor, and balancing the stakes of it, and still putting it over as a big deal. And at this point, both Excalibur, Tony, and JR just burst into laughter. Yeah. And it's like a release valve. Like you hear them laughing, and you can't help but follow them along with it. And give them their credit, like JR sometimes he is a bit grouchy on commentary, but he didn't let that be the case in this, because he knew what this match needed. And Excalibur, as I said, Excalibur and Tony, they literally just burst out laughing when the Matt Fat comes up. And Excalibur's like tripping all over his words because he's just thinking it's so funny. And it just sells the wackiness and allows the audience to go with them so perfectly, but not in a way that like undermines the stakes at the same time. As I said, it's really well done. And then of course there is like a clap track, and there's booing, and there's chanting, and there's clapping underneath it as well, which just helps the atmosphere of the match as well, even though obviously they're doing it in an empty environment, and it wouldn't have been present. while they were doing it. You go along with it because of the way they've set things up and because of the way the commentators are allowing you to go with it as well. You can match what they're doing. So perfectly done by the commentators. And that's something that will continue on throughout, but I wanted to bring it up at this point because I definitely noticed them just completely cracking up when the Matt fact came up. Yeah,
definitely. And it definitely felt like JR wasn't completely on board until maybe this moment. You know, he had a couple of comments earlier on and you kind of go, okay, JR. And then for them to sort of fully buy in this moment, it made all the difference. And like you said, that crowd noise, like if there was, you know, real crowd there, they would go absolutely mental at that part. So it felt very natural at that time to hear that compared to, you know, maybe different parts of the match. And also what I find hilarious about this moment is that it's just accepted that Santana and Ortiz are trying to legitimately drown Matt Hardy. Yeah. Like they're just okay with it. They're like, oh yes, they're just trying to murder him, of course. And the fact
if it was Stam, I'm sure he would kick out at 3. So
yeah. They had the fact, like, on the matter of fact that, like, Matt Hardy can hold his breath for, like, 300 and something seconds. And
oh, really? Oh, I missed that. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
And when they get out of the pool, that Matt Hardy's just led there, face down, in the pool. And the commentary team are like, well, I guess they're just leaving him for dead. And it's just like, okay, then sure.
Last thing I'll say is just amazing performance by Ortiz again, just the way he like flounders around in the water. So hilarious.
The little steps well, you mentioned that, like, Santana, he dives in, but Ortiz goes to it's a 3-foot pool. They say this, the commentators say it's a 3-foot pool. Santana goes up to the little steps and takes like the teeny tiny steps down into the pool.
It's like a Mr. Bean bit.
Yeah, exactly. And it really just, like, it sets you up really to see Matt Hardy come back up and take them out, because they really did the pantomime villain bit there.
As I said, Hardy emerges. He set out of the pool, sets up Ortiz on a table, and then goads Santana into charging at him, and he then back body drops Santana over his head onto Ortiz through the table. He then puts Ortiz in a bell that's nearby. He rings it, and Ortiz sells it like he's having a seizure or something.
Yeah, it's like he becomes unable to control his body.
He grabs a chair of wheels and then duct tapes Ortiz to it.
Yeah, he says he prescribes him an aftercare plan, which is to rest in that chair, and then he just kind of wheels him off.
Yep, and that's the last we see of Ortiz. He's done for the night.
Yeah.
And then, of course, brawling with Santana, lock him in the ice chest, which is a throwback to the street fight where those guys locked Matt Hardy in an ice chest. And this is the last we see of Proud and Powerful. Yeah, just overall, what did you think of this sort of stanza of the match?
I loved it. It was ridiculous. It felt right. It was it's really fun. You know, I've never been to a football stadium, so I was like, okay, there's a pool there. Okay, there's a giant bell. Sure. Okay, there's a wheelchair and an ice cabinet. Okay, yeah. But I was completely bought in on it at this point because they're, you know, as we said, they transition through these moments from wrestling to these, you know, cinematic or comedy bits. So by the time we got to this bit, you know, it just felt fun and exciting and just totally made sense. And, you know, they talk about the fact that the pool has water from the lake of reincarnation in it, and that's why he didn't die. And it's just like, it rewards you if you know that stuff, and if you don't, there's the tidbits there for you. It just felt like that the match really took off from that point. And I suppose this is where maybe you would say, okay, now we're in cinematic territory.
Yeah, this was like the most pure silly portion of the match. You know, it didn't do anything really for any of their characters or anything, which we will see later. But, you know, as we said, they sort of edged people up to the cliff, and this is them just like getting pushed off and you're free falling in these guys' cinematic style, and it just works so perfectly. This is my favorite presentation of Matt Hardy ever in AEW, and Santana and Ortiz were just incredible with the way they sold things in this as well.
Yeah, the commitment I think is what makes these bits. They were 100% in it, and when they're having fun, you can feel it. You can really feel it. And that's all you really want for the wrestlers that you watch. You want them to be having a good time. And that's, rewarding in itself.
And Santana Ortiz, they're like an act that, like, in its time when it wants to be, can like just drip with the authenticity of just being so tough. I reviewed the parking lot fight a number of episodes ago, and those guys, when they want to, they can look like just mean, serious killers. But in this, they were happy to as you said, play the pantomime villain. Props to them for just being willing to go with it and go with the tone of the match that they needed, even if it ran, counter to how they would normally present themselves. Now,
Have you wanted to use your home equity to pay off debt or improve your house, but found the old way too painful? There's now a new, better option for accessing your home equity. It's called HomePace. Here's the key. It's not a loan, so there's no monthly payments or interest. Instead, HomePace gives you money up front as an investment in your home. That's right. You get money that you can use however you want without the burden of monthly payments. Then someday when you decide to sell, you share a portion of the gains or losses in your home's value with HomePace. That means if your home's value drops, HomePace takes a loss too. HomePace gives homeowners a better choice to access home equity. No monthly payments, no interest. To get an instant quote, go to homepace.com/quote. It takes less than 5 minutes. That's homepace/quote to get started.
Of course, the next focus we get to is Hager, Jake Hager, who finds the bar that Hangman is in. He sits down next to Hangman at the bar. Hangman pours him a whiskey and said, "Did you come here to drink or did you come here to fight?" Turns out came here to do both. And they start brawling. Hangman uses his agility to pull off some, acrobatics around the pool table and the bar before Hager finally catches him, slams him on the pool table, drives him down the bar like full Western style, and then gut-wrench power bombs him through a table that's nearby for a 2 count. This is the best Hager has ever looked in AEW, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is such a... I think I maybe love this bit more than, the Broken Mat segment. I think there's something about this that's really special. And it's the first thing when I think of this match is actually the first thing that always comes to mind.
The bar and brawl, yeah. Well, Omega, of course, comes in to Hangman's aid. The pair shatter like 6 or 7 bottles of the bubble, a little bit of the bubbly on Hager's head before Kenny hits a V trigger and then bends over for Hangman to hit a buckshot lariat off Kenny's back, in a move that Hangman would eventually do in 2022 to retain his AEW championship against Lance Archer. That when I resaw that spot after having seen this Lance Archer match, I just went boof. That blew my mind that popped up again.
You had Galaxy Brain.
They're always pulling out these Easter eggs. They're always doing this. The Elite are. And after the pair dispose of Hager, Hangman pours Omega a glass of milk. Omega pours Hangman a glass of whiskey, and they cheers before drinking and then walking off a unified team once again. You said this was your favorite part of the match. Why?
It's not only is it fun, it's just absolutely dripping in story and tension. And I think it's really important that, even before the segment where Kenny went through the guardrail, we saw Hangman on his horse alone. He could, the concept that he could probably hear what's going on, but he chooses not to get involved. And he sees the sign for the bar and stops looking for Sammy. Hilariously tells his horse to stay like a dog and go to the bar. I mean, he hasn't contributed to the match at all. There's this sense that Hangman could be the reason they lose this.
Yep.
For the stakes to feel that high in that moment, like, is Hangman even... We all know he's going to fight, but is he going to fight from the right place? He's really in this space of not connected. He's got this real otherness to him, and it's very bitter and sour, and we know he can go, but he only really goes when it comes, those titles and keeping Kenny on that edge to want to be the tag team champions with him is the only thing that's keeping him going. This match essentially means very little to him. So when we come to the bar, hilariously, the horse is still there. It stayed. And we come in and we see Hangman at the bar, and it is, you know, the classic Western shot. And they do have this sense of dialogue is really great. It's that moment that is cinema in that moment. You know what I mean? Like it's very right for this moment. And to know that, okay, is this the moment where Hangman's going to get involved? And, you know, lo and behold, he does. But he really takes a beating from Hager here as well, which I think is quite important, that we know Hangman can go. We know he's very good. And he's completely fresh, right? Hager's already been fighting in this match. But Hager really gives it to Hangman. For all intents and purposes, Hangman should be ready to absolutely crush Hager. But he's not, you know, he's checked out. And when he says, you know, did you come here to fight or did you come here to drink? And then goes, honestly, what's the difference? It's like, oh my God, like, oh, it just says so much. You see Hangman as well, like through that, he's so athletically gifted, you know, he's flipping around to
leaping off everything.
Yeah. But it's not for offense, it's for defense as well. Like, we know Hangman can do a standing shooting star press. We've seen it. He's not doing it. And so we really get this sense of, oh wow, you know, Hangman really can't, he's not, what's the word? He's not fully,
he's not invested.
He's not invested, but he also, there's a part of him that's just he can't fight this. And you sort of wonder, is he going to actually take a pin here or something? You know what I mean? Like, he's really not. And Hager does go for the pin. But of course, it's Hangman. He can't accept the loss. He's really in this place where losing is just way too intense for him. He needs to feel like a winner. So, of course, he kicks out. But you see, he's just like absolutely, just from this section, just absolutely decimated by it. And when he goes through that table, I mean, shout out to the drink that beautifully like flies into the air, the perfect sort of semicircle movement, that it just felt like, I was like, that is just like a beautiful like shot, just a beautiful coincidence that only happens in well-planned segments.
Yeah.
In well-planned shots and thoughts and placing props in the right place. So you really got this sense of it's a really complete moment, you know, it's very well thought out. And for Kenny to come around the corner and sort of save him was also very big, because at no point did Hangman feel the need to leave the bar and go help. But Kenny, who's gone through a guardrail, has managed to get up, go through the stadium and work out where they are and save him. And it just feels like a very important moment for Hangman and Kenny particularly. We know in this match, Kenny's still fighting. He's still trying that connection. He's not given up on his tag team partner. He doesn't want to give up on them. He doesn't want to give up on the Elite. I mean, he says in the VT, like, you know, if we lose this, I don't know what that means for us. But Adam's not in that same place. And to see him come through, you know, Kenny come through for Adam was very much like, oh, is this gonna, you know, what's this gonna mean? And then, you know, Adam finally turns it on once Kenny's there. And again, that says so much about them, that Adam is not, he's too deep in his own feelings to fight for himself. But this concept of the tag team and this connection with Kenny and keeping him at that arm's length but not letting him go is important. And so finally, Hangman does rise to the occasion with all of that kind of tandem bottle smashing. You're like, oh, okay, so these guys, they will work together. Like, they're
getting
will do
on
it.
the same page.
They're on the same page. And that's only when they can take out Hager. That's only when they're able to actually take out this big guy, is them working together. And just the V trigger into that buckshot lariat, all that movement, it was just so like, good. Oh, it was just so good, and tells you so much that despite all their differences, these guys, they have this special blend. And it's also important to note that Kenny doesn't necessarily contribute to that finisher. He's the platform for Hangman to be his best. Literally, he bends over and acts as a platform for him to do that. And I think that speaks volumes as well. And the fact that they share a drink, you know, at the end of that is just great. And again, tells you so much that despite all their differences, Kenny doesn't drink, he doesn't go to bars, you know, that's not his character, but he will stand at a bar with Hangman and have a drink, and Hangman will lean into it. Of course there's a liter of milk behind the bar, of course there is, and Adam knows exactly where it is. And the cheers bud and the cheers baby from Adam, you kind of go like, oh god, like despite all of this, despite Adam being so checked out and this brawl and he almost really just eating the dust, this kind of feeling that if Kenny comes through, Adam can do it, but otherwise he's not going to help, and he hasn't helped, and he doesn't help after that segment as well. And the only reason they, you know, Hangman turns up afterwards is because Kenny announces that they got to go back. I just think it's such a solidifying turning point for Adam that he is checked out of the Elite. He is not going to help in this match. But if Kenny shows up, he cannot let that go yet. That's too important for him. It just sits in my mind as such a defining moment for who Adam is and where he's going to go.
Yeah, all I'll add to that, that's fantastic. I love that. I love what you just said there. All I'll add is them sharing a drink at the end is such a unifying moment. You know, I'm not sure how many times these guys shared the screen beforehand, but you know, at least in the last 5 times these guys have shared a screen, it was the end of that Revolution match where you had that moment where it looked like, are the Bucks and Kenny about to kick Hangman here? Like, are they about to triple super kick him? And then you had that moment with Hangman, is he about to go for Omega here and attack Omega here? And you know, with Hangman in the state that he's in at that point, he's been sitting at home replaying that moment in his mind. And these guys, they've all gone back and they've watched the tape of that match by this point. They all know what was happening. They've seen that Hangman was like holding the rope like he was about to do that. Hangman's seeing that the Bucks and Omega were like looking a bit like they were ready to load up like they did on AJ Styles. And the fact that they come in, they share this fight together, and then they share a drink, and they have their own drinks, they pour one another a drink. And alcohol at this point has been a point of contention between them. There's been times where Omega's taken a drink out of Hangman's hand because he's like, mate, we're working here, we're professionals. But not only do they share a drink, Omega pours Hangman a drink, and Hangman pours Omega a drink, and they're just like, let's put our differences aside. These guys are bigger jerks. The beef we have with them is greater than any kind of beef I have with you. Let's go and finish this. And it's just a unifying moment. And before we recorded this, I sent out a tweet and just saying, I'm recording about Stadium Stampede. What was your favorite moment? And overwhelmingly, people agreed with you. This is the part that people remember. And I think it's because, like, as we said, like, we've had the silliness that was the Matt Hardy, and this is like the heart. There is comedy. There's like an element of comedy in it, you know, particularly the way Hager like drags Hangman across the bar. It's
stunning.
You know, yeah. But this is like the heart. This is emotional, and this is the coming together of two people that you want to see getting along, but aren't on the same page. So this is my favorite part of the match as well. I love everything about this bar scene. It's perfect, right down to, as you said, that drink just flying, and when they cheers, the milk and the whiskey just mix in together.
Oh yeah,
it looks completely gross.
I mean, and in Kenny Omega fashion, he's never on camera drunk a drink without basically pouring it all over himself, and it's just so funny as well to watch like the milk just like pour down him, and it just says so much. And you know, you can sort of think back to this moment where Kenny is really, he's trying so hard for Hangman. You know, he pours him the alcohol, and later on, you know, not long after this, FTR comes in and there's this whole thing, and it's poured on Kenny, and Kenny even, you know, he grabs a beer and he toasts it, and like he's really, that concept of him pouring him that drink really shows Kenny is trying so very, very hard. It just feels like this was really well planned, really well thought out, and important when you look back on it. I just thought this is really like one of the piece de resistance moments of the matches.
Absolutely. We do have to leave the bar, unfortunately. It's a great, as I said, great scene. But we do have to leave it. We return to the field with the Bucks and Jericho and Sammy. And the first thing we see is Matt Jackson and Sammy Guevara brawling. They're sort of intercutting between what's going on. We'll deal with each pair separately. And Guevara, they're both using acrobatics to avoid one another before Matt goads Sammy into charging him and catches him in a Northern Light suplex, which turns into a locomotion Northern Light suplex, which turns into another one and another one and another one, and running the entirety of the field. Libby, do you actually think they did the whole thing, the whole 100 yards, or what? How do you think they shot this?
There's a part of me that goes, Matt Jackson and Sammy Guevara would try and do 100 yards of Northern Light suplexes.
You won't
and
do it.
And there's also a part of me that Matt Jackson would go, no, I'm absolutely not doing that. They're definitely, I mean, oh God, who knows? I mean, definitely at this point, that barroom brawl, I think, I mean, I don't know. There are definitely segments that are pre-taped, slotted in. I think I hope the Northern Light suplexes were pre-taped and sort of cut too, because that would just take so much out of a person. But it's also like, I absolutely adore it. Like, it's so ridiculous. It's so dumb. To me, it's even more ridiculous than the Matt Hardy pool segment. And I just absolutely adore the concept of them actually doing 100 yards. In kayfabe, yes, they did it 100%. Yeah. In shoot, I don't know. It seems very well cut together and at the right moment. So I think they might have pre-taped them, but it's amazing.
This is obviously an ensemble cast, but I've got a theory that like Sammy Guevara is the main character of Stadium Stampede, and this is his worst day ever, because there's just like there's this I love how they intercut this with the brawl we're going to talk about between Nick and Chris Jericho later, and they're like intercutting between it, but there's this brilliant shot and it's like dead on, and all you see is like the flipping over and coming around, and just Sammy Guevara coming around, and the look on his face is just of like astonishment, dread, like worry. It's brilliant. And it's just like the perfect kind of comedic silliness that we didn't see enough of, I think, in like the 2021 version of and the version of Sammy Guevara we're getting today as well. He is brilliant. Sammy Guevara is brilliant in Stadium Stampede. Just the facial expressions and everything. And then, of course, this moment climaxes with Rick Knox giving Matt he gets the whole way. He does a touchdown dance. I think it was a dance that American viewers may understand. I don't know. You're British. You may or may not understand it. But
I researched it afterwards.
Oh, what is it? Tell me. Please tell me.
So it's a reference to a wrestler called Alex Wright, who I think was in ECW. And his gimmick was like a German discotheque vibe. So he would always go down to the ring, like doing like ridiculous dancing. Like it was like, and I think his entrance music was like Europop. So like Matt was just kind of, I think, just calling back to what in his mind maybe one of the most ridiculous sort of like dancing elements he could think of.
But Rick Knox rightly gives him a yellow flag for excessive celebrations. And then Matt Jackson, because it's Rick Knox, Matt Jackson gives him a super kick. So cherry on the cone there, on the ice cream there. We then, of course, at the same time, and as I said, these are happening at the same time and cutting between them. Nick Jackson and Chris Jericho are brawling. Jericho throws Nick into the mouth of like the Jaguars logo. There's like a 3D Jaguars logo, and Jericho throws Nick into the mouth of it. It's nearby where they're brawling. This brings out the mascot for the Jacksonville Jaguars, Jackson DeVille, who taunts Jericho with like some crotch thrusts. And Jericho responds, hitting the Judas effect. Libby, I think if there's like one moment that sums up this match in its entirety, that for me would be it.
Just the pure ridiculousness of the moment. Yeah.
And then after Nick gets up, Jericho grabs the witch's hat and wears it as a witch's hat, like the orange traffic witch's hats, witch's cones, whatever you call them in America, as he did in the street fight, before Nick super kicks him through the training soccer goals. And he gets the line from JR. It's long enough. It's deep enough. It's good. Brilliant bit of just like organic, using what's around, like what you'd expect to see on a field. I think those goals, I would call them soccer goals, football goals, but I think they're used for like the kickers to practice into. They kick into those so it doesn't, fly however long those kicks
the middle
fly.
Of the game.
Yeah. But then Jericho used his baseball bat to get back into the match. He gets a close 2 count but then Jericho challenges the instant replay, and we get some great back and forth between him and Aubrey. I just love the chemistry between Chris Jericho and Aubrey Edwards.
Oh, 100%. And it also felt very right for Aubrey. Like, yes, she would be involved in this somehow. She's a character within AEW itself. And for Jericho to not challenge her, I think would have been strange.
Yeah, those guys have got old country beef at this point. So.
Oh yeah.
And after Matt is done with Sammy Guevara and suplex him the length of the field, he joins Nick and the pair combine to take down Jericho. As you said, that numbers game, taking them out, having Nick splash through the tables. He's running down like the grandstand, down all of the stairs of the first level, and gives Jericho a big splash through the table. And then just to sort of cap this scene off, Hangman then comes out with a line marker and draws it over Chris Jericho. Yeah,
it's such a perfect little moment to end that, especially with the tensions between like Hangman and the Bucks, for Hangman to just come out at the end and to get that sort of pop moment by doing the line marker over him, and Matt and Nick just in the back like, excuse me, for him to finally show up. This is the first time Matt and Nick have seen Hangman this whole time, apart from when he was on the horse at the beginning. For him to finally show up also just felt like it spoke volumes to how sort of like, if was Hangman around the corner the whole time not helping. You know what I mean? Like, I think it was such a good little tidbit to also their kind of ongoings as well.
And the match enters its final stanza. We're back with Sammy, the main character, as I said, on his day from hell, and things just keep getting worse. He's crawling along the turf, and what happens? Of course, the sprinklers start getting him wet.
Of course.
And he's floundering around. As I said, I love Sammy Guevara showing ass. Brilliant. Brilliant. Not enough of it happening at the moment. Too much of a bro for my liking right now. But in this extremely likable and very, very funny to watch. And then we hear the rumblings of the buggy that's piloted by Kenny Omega and Matt Hardy, and both men are ranting like they're like some anime cartoon characters. Bryce Remsburg is like just busting his ass trying to keep pace next to it.
The concept that Bryce thinks he can keep up. And that so also funny. Like, he's gonna be there because Sammy is gonna be hit by the golf buggy and someone's gonna have to count it. Like, just the absolute stress you feel of Bryce Remsburg at that moment is so funny to me. And the fact that as well Sammy was like thinking that he won before this moment for them to show up is just, it's just absolute gold. I love it so much.
Sammy, of course, is running for his life at this point, having PTSD flashbacks, and gets into he gets to the end of the field, climbs up into the stands, but he eventually gets cornered on a platform that's set up above one of the entrance tunnels. He brawls with Hardy and Omega, but then Neo, the drone, makes his debut, distracting Sammy enough for Omega to hit a real flush V-trigger, gets Sammy up on his shoulders, and it looks like he's just going to do a one-wing angel, but then he steps forward and does an absolutely bananas insane one-winged angel with the pair falling a good, I'd say 5 meters or so onto some wooden padding that's been set up below. And this gets the 3 from Omega. The Elite celebrate, dousing Omega with Gatorade, and then fireworks go off in the background and they pose together to end the pay-per-view. One for the good guys, Libby. What an incredible
Yes.
ending. What did you think of this ending stanza?
I mean, I loved it. I felt like we left on a really good point with the Young Bucks, and then moving to this, the fact that there was a platform set up in the seats, I was at a point where I was like, yeah, that seems about right.
Yeah.
That seems about right. Sure, the Elite set that up before. It didn't even occur to me until afterwards, like, that's interesting. And that one
wing angel. The cameraman was meant to be there. Who knows?
Yeah, he was there waiting. Appreciate that. So, yeah, the One Wing Angel was crazy. Definitely like a big way to end the match, like a real climax of just, we've gone through all these different things. What's the big thing that can really end this? You know, we've gone through pools, we've gone through bars, we've jumped field goals, we've done 100 yards of Northern like suplexes. For Kenny to do this at the end, I think it was just perfect. We all know Kenny does not like high spots, but he'll do them. So as well, this is kind of like, it's almost like Kenny giving back in this moment, like wanting to do something really amazing. And I mean, poor Sammy. Sammy is obliterated. And what I think is really significant is that once the pin is done, that all the Elite jump into that pit and they're all just grabbing at Kenny to just try and get him out of there. Like, it's very much this moment of like, they want to look after him and get him out and celebrate. And then, interestingly, you know, they have this lovely, it felt very emotional watching it now, like where we are with AEW, to see them all celebrating together made me like feel very emotional. I was like, wow, was it really this long ago that like this was happening? It's crazy that after the just absolute charming fact that Matt pours Gatorade over Kenny and they're laughing.
And that's like another football reference, right?
Like, yeah. And it's just like it's totally cashed in on the fact that they're in a stadium and they're celebrating like they won a game. Adam is just clutching to Kenny, keeping Kenny up, and he's the only one actually keeping Kenny up. And then Matt turns to Hangman, you know, they're in the midst of all laughing and celebrating, and he turns to Hangman and he says, "Where were you?" And Hangman just suddenly, his face drops and he just shakes his head. He doesn't really have an answer, and it's this moment that the rest of the Elite are celebrating. Kenny is trying to keep all of his bodily pieces in one, but Hangman is suddenly struck with the fact that he didn't participate in this match. He wasn't there with the Elite. They were all celebrating this win, but really he wasn't there. You know, at the brawl in the beginning, he wasn't there to go through the stadium. He went to the bar, he had his fight, he left, and the end was, you know, Kenny taking out Sammy, and then Hangman was there for the win at the end. And you sort of get this feeling, this sudden wave of almost regret through Hangman's face compared to the rest of the Elite. And you see him pull away from Matt, and he just goes over to Kenny and focuses all his attention on keeping Kenny up, like this one remaining sense of connection in the Elite. And it's very bittersweet to look at it. Like, they're all hitting their poses and the fireworks are going off, but you can't help but notice the sort of pained look on Hangman's face, as if he's come to a realization of that, no, he's realizing, oh, I wasn't present for this, apart from when Kenny came and saved me. So it's this very, again, it ends on this high note. It's great. And then you've got this little bit of story of Page that's not forgotten. And just watching the fireworks go off and then it fade to black with that scene at the end, it really like felt like this ending to the Stadium Stampede and this feud, but also the beginning of something else for the Elite.
But maintaining the integrity of their characters, who they are, what they've been through, all those things we're talking about with like the things that we love about the Elite. And like, man, the Matt Jackson and Hangman Page thing is almost like more complex than Kenny Omega and Hangman.
Oh,
like,
boy.
It kind of is like, can you guys just kiss or fight? Like, please. Put us out of our misery.
Truly. It's this amazing thing that still lives today, you know, and there was definitely this sense of, you know, not forgetting what happened in Japan with the Bucks and the Golden Lovers, and also this sense of that, you know, the Young Bucks have spoken before about how they really wanted to build everything around Hangman and do it at the right pace, and they really wanted to use what, you know, Bucks versus Golden Lovers and that tension and transport it to AEW in a new way. And for this to,
which they managed magically.
They have, and they've done it so well. And it's much like a lot of the things the Elite do well, is that they don't repeat the past. They just don't forget it. And it informs things. And there is this idea of that, you know, this toxicity between them. They can't help but repeat the past. They make the same mistakes. What can be different is how they react to them and the environment they're in. And for this Stadium Stampede match to be part of that, and I think a very clear indication of a different path for Hangman. I think it's such a cool little part of that story, that this bizarre, very unique format is part of that tale, of that change, and of that move.
It's, I mean, just the one winged angel at the end as well. I just want to go back to that because it's so high, and that is like a really dangerous move to be taking at that height. Sammy Guevara is a mad lad, absolute mad lad, as is Kenny Omega. Like, what a bonkers way to end the match. You know, as we said, like, what can potentially end the match? Well, the most devastating finisher in all of wrestling from, you know, 5 meters high. Absolute ginormous climax for it. And the scale, we talked about the scale, that's so that we saw at the start with the stadium. We see like that final shot, we see the scale again where like the Elite light up the board. We've got fireworks going off in the background. It's just a beautiful moment at the end of the pay-per-view. Absolutely agree with everything you've said there about the sort of the celebration, but the tension. I didn't feel that tension until I did a rewatch, until I'd seen it again, because I think, look, in the moment I was just so swept up by this whole thing. As you said, like by the time they got to that platform, like they could have done anything and I would have gone along with it because of how they'd structured this match so perfectly. As we said, like easing it in, balancing the silliness and the heart, and then the big climax at the end, which is a huge climax that absolutely fits the ending of this style of match. We mentioned that for both of us, our favorite bits is the bar scene. I just wanted to throw to the guys who did respond to the tweet that I put out beforehand. So if you're not following me, Sir_Samuel, every now and again before I record one of these things, I'll throw something out, I'll throw a question out or something. So the people who responded, Mike, Preventure at Rebel Fox, everything about the bar fight from are you here to fight or drink? Honestly, what's the difference? To the debut of the buckshot lariat off someone's back. So he also picked up how it was done later. And then Matt Jackson's 100-yard Northern Lights suplex stands out. Craig from Pro Wrestling Musings, that's at Craig PW Musings, says Jericho arguing with the ref, so arguing with Aubrey, which we both loved as well. Howard Schilling, and I think this is a really good tweet. So that's at Howard_E_Schill. He said, the fact it seems like a fever dream. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's weird. It's chaotic. I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll get into talking about that in the legacy because the timing of this match is such an important part, I think, of what made this match so special. Wrestling Rhymes, Dan from Wrestling Rhymes says, just Hangman on a horse, to be honest. As did Bram Bigelow at Stu Bram 2. Hangman's arrival on the horse and chasing Sammy down. Trish Spears 48 agreed with us. The bar brawl. She also mentioned the field goal. And more love for the bar brawl from the Jerriest Jer at the Jerriest_Jer. And then lastly, the Exalted Dom _DeLonge, Ortiz getting his bell rung, literally. So,
it was so ridiculous.
Yeah.
So ridiculous.
A lot of love for all the parts of this match. As I said, like the thing that I think, because everyone likes this match, and there's lots of cinematic matches that have happened since and happened beforehand, particularly in 2020. But what I think like makes this match great is the structure. Even though it does go for a long time, it feels like a breeze, like it watches really quickly. And that's because they've got like a really clear narrative direction for every scene and a really clear narrative direction for the entirety of the match. The overarching narrative is like that the good guys can win, and they can win it by being themselves. They're like irreverent selves with their hijinks that people hate. They can beat these like serious usurpers to their throne. And in every single scene, there's like a setup where the good guy gets like an early moment. Then the bad guy takes advantage and gets an advantage. But then through like some sort of wacky hijinks, some sort of hilarious thing, the good guys get the win. And that's the same in just about every single scene that we talked about. That's the same the way that it works across the whole thing. And as you mentioned as well, there's like an ongoing theme of like the numbers game.
Yeah, like it's in this completely nonsensical format with all these crazy things going on. They managed to find this thing that makes sense, which is that, you have to, it's a team game, and it's about using these moments to go all over the stadium and to take out them one by one. We literally have some of the craziest, silliest things people may have seen on AEW up to this point, but it just makes total sense as you move through the match. They find the rhyme and the reason to get to that massive finish at the end. It's just very well thought out, and it's also very genuine. Like it feels very like they were all invested in this. They were all having a good time. They all clearly put a lot of thought into this, and a lot of thought was put into the production. So the whole thing is just kind of, it is like a fever dream, but it's a welcomed one. And for some reason, it does make sense.
And one thing I'll also add is like the gags and the hijinks. It's all organic. It suits the setting that they're in. And most of it stems from like long-term character arcs or story bits or just Easter eggs from the past. And this is where I'll start getting into the comparisons. Like the one that the WWE tried to do that was like I felt like very much trying to emulate this was the Money in the Bank race through their quarters. And I think the difference is like the hijinks and the gags in that. Firstly, they didn't like set it up, as we said, like the way they set up this match, where they started out with like just normal wrestling, and like it was a wrestling match that just happened to be happening in a stadium, and they slowly like moved things out and brought the hijinks started to come in, and the more crazier and wackier elements came in slowly, whereas that like straight away it was weirdness and wackiness, and the gags were they weren't fitting of what was happening. It didn't have the same sort of organic nature to it that I think this one had, and that's why I think this one works, and also because this one also has heart. It has like the serious moments. It's not just 40 minutes of hijinks and comedy. It's got the things like the barroom brawl, like at the ending you mentioned, there's a celebration, but there's still like a note of story and character in there.
I think as well they did, because, the Elite, they are crazy mad scientists, and they probably could have gone even wilder if they wanted to. But there was this sense of, these things happen in this environment. The things that are there make sense. And it felt like they had edited themselves, and that they had gone, okay, this scene is happening now, or we're going to cut between these two simultaneous things. And this is why, this person isn't involved here, or this sets up this person to be out for a while to then come back up. Yeah. I didn't catch much of that WWE one, but am I right in saying it was like the men's and the women's?
They did them both at the same time.
It's just too much. That just sounds like absolute chaos to me. It sounds like the focus, like this had focus. It had focus moments throughout. Whereas this concept of, it just sounds like there was maybe way too much going on in something like that.
Also, to make a direct comparison, this is just for that I could go into 1,000 gags in that thing that I don't think really worked, because I just don't think the writers are very funny compared to what these guys were doing when it wasn't as organic. But there's in both matches, you've got a moment where some idiot some idiot bad guy thinks they've won it when they haven't. And in this one, it's Sammy Guevara. It's right at the end, and he is literally like he's being taken out and he's waking up from that and thinking that he's the last man standing. You can buy it because within his moment he's just woken up. He can't see anyone else around. He thinks that, oh, look, mate, maybe I've won it, guys. Maybe we've won. In the WWE one, the moment is that they've been told at the start that the Money in the Bank is on the top of the roof, and Dana Brooke, for some reason, because there's like a Money in the Bank briefcase in one of the boardrooms, thinks she's won it in the boardroom. And it's just like, and then it takes this weird intercut thing with Stephanie McMahon calling her an idiot that tells her that she's not. And it's not funny because it doesn't make any sense because like no one's that stupid. You know, from Sammy's point, he does look stupid, yes, but you can believe that he is that stupid.
100%, 100%. And if the goal is that, like, if the thread throughout has been, you know, people are being knocked off one by one, and it totally makes sense that Sammy thinks everyone else has been knocked out and he's the last one. Yeah.
Just to bring up other matches as well, did you watch the Boneyard match?
I didn't watch it. I've seen bits of it, and I know it's very well received, I believe.
Yeah. I think that's probably this one and the Boneyard. I think there was lots of matches that were done in 2020 that were cinematic because wrestling organizations were just going, what can we do? Like, how can we do it? And people also really liked the Firefly Funhouse, which was in like this altered state, and sort of that was a complete fever dream. That was like an LSD trip or something. But the Boneyard match was so at the time when I was writing for Wrestling Headlines at the end of 2020, we threw in an extra category to our match of the year stuff because it had been like the year of cinematic wrestling of like what was the best one, and the Stadium Stampede and the Boneyard got like 80% of the vote between the two of them. Boneyard won out, and that one has a lot less of the kookiness. For me, that was the other way that you can kind of do these things, and that was almost like it was a scene from The Expendables, you know, where you've got like this old action hero who you love, you know, in those movies you've got like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Bruce Willis, and they get to be like the tough old grizzled action heroes that they were in the 80s, but with like this grisly added vibe because they're now, you know, much older. And it kind of lets you like relive your youth and think like, oh, I'm a middle-aged man at this point who's going bald, but, you know, I can still be the badass that I was in my 20s ripping and tearing. And that's like it was that kind of action scene where it was like The Undertaker playing his greatest hits in like a really cinematic and really well done manner that put over, you know, like the greatness of this character. It's a very different match, but that was like the other cinematic match that I would say really works, along with the Firefly Funhouse, but that's like a whole other thing that I can't.
I think the thing about this,
that wasn't even a match.
It was an experience.
Yeah, it really
the thing about the Stadium Stampede as well is that it doesn't I don't immediately go in my mind Stadium Stampede, oh, that's a cinematic match. It felt like it had cinematic moments, but it existed within this wrestling sphere, within this kind of rationality of them being in this stadium and using it. And also, like, there were moments that are, you know, it starts in that wrestling, and then we have these more like scenes, cinematic scenes, than the whole thing being cinema. And I think that also sets it apart from a lot of cinematic matches, is that it's this kind of hybrid of what a cinematic match is and wrestling and what AEW does and stands for. In a way, I sort of feel like it's made its own category of within the cinematic like wrestling genre. It's sort of this blend of a lot of elements rather than just trying to deliver cinema. Which I think maybe makes it a bit more genuine because, you know, sometimes it can go over people's heads and sometimes people do just, they want to watch the wrestling. Yeah. And I think it blends these things that makes it unique within the sphere of all the different cinematic matches that are out there. Yeah.
And I think that this worked so much more successfully than the second one. And not just because of the fact that it happened during the pandemic and the second one was kind of during a live show. I don't think the second one had the same structure and the same discipline. Like the second one was kind of like as you said, like there's a bunch of scenes, but they didn't have the natural flow to them that this one had. Of course, it didn't have the wrestling at the start, which, as we said, like that was important for setting things up. But then you had like these just random scenes where like, suddenly FTR and Proud and Powerful in like a weird dance
underground
sort of thing
club.
happening, and then have a fight there. And then even though there's a pay-per-view going on next door, apparently the Jacksonville Jaguars are also doing like crucial like planning and coaching stuff.
Of course.
In the middle, at 11 o'clock at night, and they're interrupting that and stuff. And the gags they're not set up in previous ways that like the gags in this were. They're not as organic. And I also think, and this is, I think, the last thing that I want to bring up is how important do you think it was that this happened at the time when it happened in the pandemic, when there was so much uncertainty in the world? How much do you think that plays into making this match so special?
I genuinely believe this match couldn't have happened without it being the pandemic. It is a birth of AEW rising against any doubts that they couldn't survive this pandemic. It was born out of a situation that they said we're going to make the best of. And what I really loved about the pandemic time for AEW is that Daily's Place was its own character for this time. It was its own living, breathing thing. And the stadium and having it and them going, why don't we do this? I just don't think it could have happened really in any other situation because their hands were forced. And it's just so, it was fun, but it still pushed us through stories. It still told us things. I think it's such a unique part of AEW and its time, and really important to let people know as well what AEW is about. More than ever, people were probably watching wrestling during this time, and AEW could have, tried to really buckle down on, what does a mass market product do? We need to, stay alive in this time. Such a young company, but instead they went the other way and they said, no, we're different. We do things differently. We're the alternative product. Let's be alternative in this. And just cashing in on that, and cashing in on the brilliance of all the minds involved in that, I think is great. And it also gave them time to plan this properly. It's not something you want to kind of stumble into. And it definitely feels like the street fight was like a good warm up for them to learn how to plan for this. And the fact that it was the pandemic, the fact that everyone was there in that space all the time, there was time around to practice things and test things. It just really couldn't have happened if they were on the road. They would have had to carve out some time. So it's such a special, unique thing that made the best of something very, very bad at the time, and provided something great amidst it all. And also something I think the wrestlers really enjoyed doing, because the burnout was real and it was difficult, and it was nice to see everyone just having a great time and doing things that were not only really great to watch, but were genuine, because it was genuine fun for them.
Yeah, 2020 was a really dark year. And I feel like in some ways, like there was all sorts of terrible moments, but this one was, I don't know what it was like in the UK, but it felt like around this time was one of the worst times in Australia. It was when, of course, lockdown was happening, but initially in lockdown, there was this kind of, it sucks, but there was like a surge of hope almost, and we'll get through it together. But then the cracks started to show, and that's when that was around about this time that the cracks were starting to show. People were getting testy, and you started to see things that would, flare up in all sorts of weird spots later in the year. But this was just a ray of sunshine in a moment where I was feeling really down, and lots of people felt that way. In all of the commentary on that, the 2021 the list we did, 2021, where we got people to write stuff, everyone mentioned that like this was a ray of light in their life at the time. And also part of it, I think, is you mentioned in there, like the meta thing was like, how is this company going to survive in a time where like wrestling, which needs a crowd, can't have a crowd? And how can they get through this against almost impossible odds? Can they band together and do it? And that's like the narrative of this match. It's like, how can the Elite get back on the same page and overcome this obstacle that has been beating them down, that's been beating them to the punch every time, and that's been dividing them and conquering them. And that's like such a unique blend of like the meta narrative that's happening at the time, the narrative that's happening. And then crucially, of course, as you said, like in every scene in this, the good guys win. Like, and that's just, it's so positive and so uplifting in a time where we needed that. In every circumstance, the good guys win, and they do it by, as I said, they do it by being able to be themselves, by being able to rely on the kind of irreverent, positive people that they are. And even though there is that thread of tension, which has to be there because they're complex characters and they stay true to the characters that they are, it is still like overwhelmingly positive and overwhelmingly a victory for the good guys, which is just so needed at that moment. And it capped off what was just an epically successful pay-per-view. You know, you had to start with, you had Jungle Boy and MJF like wrestling each other to a standstill. You had Hikaru Shida triumphing over Nyla Rose. You had the brilliant Jon Moxley Brody Lee match, which I spoke about in episode 5 of this with Gareth. It was a triumph of a pay-per-view. They could pull it off at this point, and this was the crown jewel in it. Such a positive moment. I can see, obviously people who are listening can't see, but you're nodding along with me. Did you feel that way as well?
Yeah, 100%. And what I wanted more than anything in that moment was just for AEW to be itself, to deliver what I loved about AEW for that ray of light, and it did. It didn't try and take us to a place that wasn't right for it. You know, people really wanted a great AEW feeling pay-per-view at the time, and they gave it to us, and it felt like AEW had evolved. It felt like this was something that was them. It was, the word branded sounds bad, but it was like, it was their brand, you know? And that's what we needed at that time, was to see AEW stronger than ever, shining not only a ray of light in that time for watching it, but also to be excited for as we go forward throughout this dark time. You know, this was great, and now there's even greater things to come from the outcome of this. It wasn't like the end of an era. It was just another part of it.
Yeah, it was like a fist in the air. We will not be beaten. We're not lying down for this.
100%. And the fact that, you know, like stadium,
we're kicking out at 1.
Full BT trigger style. The fact that as well that, you know, they're having no audience. This was, I don't know how this would have been. I probably would have loved it, but being a live audience for this particular match, I reckon like it wouldn't have worked. And so this little space that this existed in, that this pay-per-view existed in, kind of benefited from the fact that there was no audience, because they just took this different route. And it was just a great moment, I think, in AEW's history.
Yeah, absolutely. Double or Nothing is a hell of a franchise. Like the first ever pay-per-view they had, you have that Cody Rhodes match and the Cody Rhodes Dustin Rhodes match, all that, and then this one was the second one, and then the third one, the return of crowds. I've got a friend who was at that, and he said it was like a religious experience.
Oh, I can imagine.
For the people out there listening, this is recorded a little bit before it's gone to air, but we're heading up to Double or Nothing. They've got a hell of a lot to live up to, this Double or Nothing 2022. And I just want to leave on the question here, particularly given that we are heading up to Double or Nothing, and that's where last year they did run a stadium stampede, even though they had a live crowd returning. And as I said, it was a mixed success at best. I liked the ending where they got back to the crowd, but I don't think it worked quite as well, as I've sort of alluded to. Do you think that this is a match type that they go back to ever again?
I have mixed feelings about it, because I think what I really liked about the second Stadium Stampede was that it felt like Sammy Guevara had been on a journey from the last Stadium Stampede to this one, and the fact that
main character, right?
Exactly, and the fact that he finished that Stadium Stampede one-on-one with Sean Spears in the ring and got the pin, compared to the year before where he was essentially turned to dust. It felt like a great culmination of what Stadium Stampede can do. I liked the second one. It was different. I don't think there was something so special about the first one that I don't know. I'd like to think it can continue going, because I love that this unique feeling that it has, and that it feels like AEW, and it makes space for wrestlers to do crazy bits. And, you know, weirdly enough, like you look back on the first Stadium Stampede and the several iterations of Matt Hardy, the 100-yard Northern Lights suplexing, that all, like, we didn't question it. We were like, of course, it's great. And then in the second one, when they were going through the offices and there was bits and stuff happening, we kind of went, you know, it's less ridiculous, but we didn't buy in on it. It didn't feel as genuine. So I'd like to think if they did another one, that there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And there is maybe something, there's somewhere in the middle where the audiences can be there for it, and also it has that charm of the first one where there was no audiences, so that really there was, you know, they could go anywhere, do anything. You didn't have to worry about who could see what.
Yeah,
I do very much feel like I don't want them just to do it because they can. It's such a special thing.
Yeah, agreed.
It should be protected. So I can't see it happening for Double or Nothing. Hey, maybe by this point they've announced there's going to be a Stadium Stampede. I don't know.
In Las Vegas. I mean, from the experience,
that could be wild. I mean, they did the whole Caesar's Palace thing before, right? And, you know, maybe they do something crazy through a casino, or I don't know. But
lesson one for me would be make sure you've got the Young Bucks in every single Stadium Stampede, or at least putting it together, because those guys are they're the geniuses of multi-man matches, and like I give a lot of praise to them for how this was structured. Obviously, it was a collaborative vision. I don't actually know, but just knowing what Young Bucks matches look like, this is like seamlessly put together and flows like a Young Bucks multi-man match does. So that would be my lesson number one if I was to give one.
The planning for the Stadium Stampede is what's most important, I think. So we'll just see. I don't know. There's a part of me that wants to protect it, but there's also a part of me that's like, no, other people should do it. It should be out there. It should continue to exist as part of its legacy. It's a very mixed feeling. I'd like to think it can continue to go on.
I definitely think that the experience of WWE gimmick pay-per-views, which have been around for over 10 years at this point, is that it dilutes the thing, dilutes the gimmick. You know, you think of the classic one is Hell in a Cell. Like, when I was first getting into wrestling in 2008, the Hell in a Cell was like mythical. But now it's just like, it's something that happens every year, and every second, like everyone's had one. Whereas before it was like this crazy thing that like the Undertaker and Triple H were specialists in because they'd had so many, and that was like a really special thing. But now it's like something that happens every year. And I think Stadium Stampede should be protected. And same with, so far they've done that with Steel Cage, with Blood and Guts, with Dog Collar even. They've protected their gimmicks, and I really hope they do that with Stadium Stampede. Like, I could go years without ever seeing one because it's such a big thing. And as I said, like, so much of the charm of this one is the timing that it was in. And even the second one, like, the thing that worked the most was the return to the crowd, and the reason that worked so well was because the idea of it was that, like, this was AEW returning to its crowd, so it was the art mirroring reality aspect. And yeah, look, I mean, I know not to bet against AEW, right, and bet against the Elite. Like, I'm sure they could pull off something mental in Las Vegas if they wanted to, or wherever they choose to do it. But yeah, I'm of the mind that please protect it, AEW.
Yes, and even though it's a ridiculous, unique situation, it should make sense. We shouldn't just do a Stadium Stampede 100%. Just because. The second one, it made sense. The Inner Circle were like, we've done this before, we'll take you on in it. For it to come up again, I don't know how or why.
Yeah.
But I do have faith in AEW that they wouldn't just, just put it on a plate and give it to you without seeing the menu first.
Yeah. Look, Libby, we have hit nearly 2 hours. This is by far the longest one of these I've ever done.
Oh my God.
Right. No, that's all right. It's the longest match we've ever done as well. So I kind of expected this to happen, but I really appreciate you popping on today. I just wanted to ask, is there anything else you want to say about the Stadium Stampede match or about anything around what we've talked about today?
No, I just think it's a great match. If you haven't watched it, you should. If you are wanting to experience feelings, to go back and watch this now and see the Elite come out to being the Elite music and to see the Inner Circle from before and what was going on, and it was very bittersweet and quite special. It felt quite lethargic to rewatch it, and it really made me think about today and where we are. So it's definitely worth rewatching, and I will never ever forget the moment in my mind where Matt Jackson grabs Sammy Guevara's head and spikes it down like a football. It's just so good, then just to see him super kick Rick Knox, it just feels like just so them. It's a real serotonin moment, and I couldn't recommend more. It's especially now going back and watching it and just experiencing it.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more with you there. I loved going back. I watched this before the last Double or Nothing as well. I went back and rewatched this, and rewatching it for this and digging in for the research that I did for the podcast was a joy. I'm so glad that I did it, and I'm so glad that I was able to have you on today. You've brought so much detail along, so much heart as well, and I love how into it we've gotten. So I really appreciate you popping on today, Libby. Lastly, if you could just let the people know if they want to chat to you, find you online, find your work, what can they do? Where can they find you?
So you can find me on Twitter at Libby_Cadman, Cadman. I also write for Wrestle Inn. I talk a lot about AEW, a lot of sort of textual analysis on the Elite and their past and their history. Tweet a lot about Japan, the scene there. You will find me deeply feeling about Kota Ibushi. So if that's your stuff, come check me out. Come say hi. It's been an absolute pleasure to come and talk about this match with you. I absolutely love it. I hope if anyone does come and check me out that they enjoy what's there.
Yeah, I'll give a shout out just to Wrestle Inn in general. It's a fantastic website. I love reading their stuff, especially if you love getting into the story and character. Wrestle Inn for me, that's the place to go for that. So if you've loved listening to this today and the way we've geeked out and nerded out about that sort of stuff, you'll love going to Wrestle Inn. So give
absolutely.
the site a look. Yeah.
And if AEW isn't your thing, there are people who are just as fervently passionate about the Joshi scene, about wrestling history and all of that, and it's definitely worth there is something. I always like to say there is something for everyone at the inn.
Hey, there's many seats at the inn. What can you say?
Exactly, including one for you, Sam.
I've got way too much on my plate for doing another lot of columns, Libby. I've been down that game. I've written 100 of them. 150 of them. So I'm tapped out at that, but I love the work you guys do there. Anyway, look, the good people, you've spent long enough listening to me, and if you've listened this long, I really appreciate it. I've absolutely been loving doing the podcast. Of course, we've got Double or Nothing coming up, which will mark a new year for the match guide. So we're going to be getting a new match guide coming out for the year that we're currently just finishing up for AEW, and that will finish at Double or Nothing 2022. So we'll be having a new list coming out, which will mean a whole new set of podcasts that we can do. And I'd love to have you back for something, Libby. We'll work out those details afterwards. But if you want to talk to me about this match, to let me know what your favorite moments were, if we missed anything, if we uncovered anything for you, please let me know. You can find me on Twitter, Sir_Samuel. And I love hearing your thoughts there as well. But thank you for listening. Libby, thank you once again. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I cannot wait to do this all again for another match next week. And I will see you then. Thanks for listening to the AEW Match Guide podcast. If you enjoyed the show, then you can subscribe on the podcast app of your choice so you never miss an episode. Also, feel free to let me know on Twitter at Sir_Samuel. I'd love to hear from you. The AEW Match Guide podcast is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find many other fantastic podcasts discussing not just AEW, but all parts of the world of professional wrestling. Looking forward to seeing you again next week. I'm Sam Brown.
Introducing Under Armour's Infinity High Sports Bra. Its ergonomic design is molded to support the natural movement of your body. With cord-out padding, the better breathability eliminates extra bulk without sacrificing support. And quick-dry padding is Under Armour's fastest-drying padding yet. When you're lifting heavy, running fast, and pushing yourself further than ever before, you need a bra that will help you go that extra mile and make you feel your best. Shop the Infinity High Sports Bra now at UA.com.